Good evening. Welcome to Valley Best Shalom. I'm Rabbi Noah Farkas, and this is Yontif University. It's a chance for us to get ready for our holidays. And if you're joining us on YouTube and on Facebook Live, it's really great to have you with me this evening. If you would like to join the Zoom conversation, you're more than welcome to do so. You just, have to go to the Valley Best Shalom page, vbs.org, and look for the appropriate link on the VBS at Home page. We're about ready to begin, so I'm really happy that anyone's joining us. I'm going to be tracking the comments on Facebook. So if you are deciding to watch on Facebook and would like to comment or ask questions, please do so, as I always enjoy having all of you ask questions and try to interact as best as possible. Okay, so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to teach the most, I think, important poem of the High Holiday experience, because it frames so much about the Jewish experience on High Holidays itself. Think about it this way. The idea of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, for our Jewish friends out there, is that the Rosh Hashanah is when we think about beginning to reflect on our lives, beginning to reflect on who we are as human beings, in our relationship with God. And as the metaphor goes, that God kind of opens this book on Rosh Hashanah and begins to look at all of our deeds, almost like an accountant would, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? And kind of like writes us down for the year, and then decides at the end whether or not we deserve a good life in the coming year. And then that gets sealed on Yom Kippur. That book kind of gets like an initial, God's initials on Yom Kippur. So that metaphor originates in the Talmud, but then is really brought to fruition through this one poem called the Unatana Tokef. And that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. The Unatana Tokef takes place in the Kedusha section of both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur Musaf, which means that it's in like the central portion of the most holy moment in Rosh Hashanah, and again on Musaf morning, on Yom Kippur morning. And we say it with trepidation. We open the ark, we sing, we sort of get ourselves ready for this particular very powerful moment. And then the whole thing just kind of switches right in the middle, and we're like ready to move into the next part of our lives by reading the Unatan Toka. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, because that's the best way I think about teaching. And we are going to I have the text here for everyone to take a look at. And again, if you're just joining me, you'll have a chance to look at this with me, and I hope that you do. So here is this wonderful prayer, and I want everyone, as we begin thinking about it, is what are the kinds of questions that come to your mind when it comes to what it means to like live and work in this world, and thinking about what kind of God image, if we can use that question appropriately, what kind of image of God do we need in our mind for this moment? And maybe it's different than what Jews have experienced in the past. So here we come to Unatana Tokef. And if you'll just look at the text here, I've made some of the words bolded, because those bolded words are actually textual references to other parts of the Bible and other parts of rabbinic literature. And so we're going to take a look at those and try to like decipher them a little bit. So it says here, I'll read the Hebrew and the English. Unatana tokef kedushat hayom, kihu nora va'ayom, uvo tinasa malchutecha, vekan bechased kis'echa, v'teshev alav be'emet. And let us acknowledge or confirm the power of the holiness of this day, for it is tremendous and awe-filled, and on it your kingship will be exalted, your throne will be established in loving kindness, and you will sit on the throne of truth. And then let me just read one more section in Hebrew, in English, and then we'll do some more deeper dives. So it says be'emet, and then it goes emet, ki atahu dayan umochiach v'yodea va'ed kotev v'chotem sofer umoneh v'tizkor et kol hanishkachot v'niftach et sefer hazichronot u'me'elav yikoreh v'chotem yad kol adam bo. So this is where that central image comes in. It is true that you are the one who judges and is the prosecutor who knows all and bears witness. You inscribe and seal, who reckons and enumerates. You remember all that is forgotten, and you open the book of records, and from it all shall be read. In it, each person's insignia. So, in these very first two sentences, we see two really important movements happening simultaneously. Number one, this day is incredibly important because it's filled with kingship, that is, majesty of the king, of God's sovereignty. It is also God's throne of loving kindness that we are asking for. And that on this day, God serves as our judge, prosecutor, if you will, and the witness. God is also the one who inscribes our name, seals our name, reckons with us, enumerates all the things that we've done, because God remembers everything. And then this really powerful moment of you open the book of records, and from it all shall be read. In it lies each person's insignia. That is the central image of the Unetanneh Tokef. Okay, so all of those bolded parts are actually quotes from somewhere else. And I want to show you a couple of them just to begin. So what I'm going to do is actually flip screens because I have two screens going simultaneously. And here, the word even tokef itself, which is the second word in the prayer, comes from the book of Esther, the 9th chapter at the end. And it says here in Hebrew, Vichtov Esther Malka bat Avichail u'Mordechai ha'Yehudi et kol tokef lekayem et igeret haporin hazot hashenit. That when Queen Esther, daughter of Avichail, wrote a second letter of Purim for the purpose of confirming with full authority the aforementioned one of Mordechai the Jew. At the end of the book of Esther, at the end of that crazy, ridiculous, sublime story of Esther, Esther has to write down everything that happened so that we would remember it, including the deeds of Mordechai the Jew. And the word that is used in Esther is the word tokef, which I think is just amazing, phenomenal, because again, we see this crazy world where we have Yom Kippur on one side, which is the most serious, intensive holiday, and we have this prayer, which is the most serious, intensive prayer, and the one word that's used in the title that brings us to this other place comes all the way from the end of the Megillah, of the silliest holiday that we have, that had, even though the story is a serious story in some ways, it is also the most ridiculous story. And so we have Purim and Yom Kippur already brought into this most serious moment through the word tokef, and that both we acknowledge that God, in some sense, is acting in a way in this poem like Queen Esther was at the end of the Shushan story, that we have to capture everything that had happened in order for us to reveal the deeds that are happening. So that's like the very first one. The second, there are like 3 or 4 major references in the Unetanneh Tokef. One is to the Megillah, one is to the book of Isaiah, and then a series of others to other rabbinic literature. So here again, we see in that first paragraph where God is supposed to be sitting on this crown, on this throne of loving kindness. Here we see in Isaiah chapter 16, the words, Huchan bechesed kiseh yoshev alav be'emet, direct quote from Isaiah, is found in Unetanneh Tokef, and it says, and the throne shall be established in goodness in the tent of David, and on it shall sit in faithfulness a ruler devoted to justice and zealous for equity. Here, Isaiah is prophesizing the future time when the kingdom of God and of Israel will be reestablished, and it is the throne of loving kindness that will rule over the people. And rather it be than a human being in the Unetanneh Tokef's question, it actually becomes God. So once again, God is acting like another human being. In the first sentence, it's as if God is acting like Queen Esther. And in the second sentence, God is acting like the Scion of David, who is sitting on this throne of loving kindness. So just think about that again. I just find this, it blows my mind, and hopefully it blows your mind, that in this most serious moment, when the ark is open and we're facing the Unetanneh Tokef, God is already embodying 2 very different personalities simultaneously. And then I want to go back to the last image from this first section, okay, which is this idea of an open book. So here is from Pirkei Avot, and it says in Pirkei Avot, it said he would say, "Those that are born will die, and those that are dead will be revived." This is a statement of the future, and the living will be judged. It is necessary to know and to make known, and to become conscious that He or God is God. God is the maker. God is the creator. God is the understander. God is the judge. God is the witness. God is the litigant, and God is destined to judge. Blessed be God, for who has before him no wrong, nor forgetfulness, no respect of persons, no taking of bribes, for all is his. And know that everything is according to the reckoning. And do not let evil impulse assure you that the netherworld is a place of refuge for you, because against your will you were created, and against your will you were born, and against your will you will live, and against your will you will die, and against your will you will be destined to give account of the reckoning before the King of Kings, the Holy One. Okay, so that's a very, very intense way of saying that the opening moments of this very powerful prayer brings us to a place of almost like dead seriousness, of complete focus, of dread, and of awe. And God is embodying those three characteristics. At the end of days, when Esther wrote that letter, in the future, when the king, Scion of David, will sit on the throne of loving kindness. And here again, God being the ultimate version of all of us, sitting in judgment over who we are. Okay, as we move into the last thing I want to say is the book itself. Here, if you look in the Unatan Tokef, it doesn't say Sefer Chaim, Sefer Mavet. It says Sefer HaZichronot, the book of remembrances, the book that is of all of the remembrances of everything that we've ever done in our lives. That book itself is mentioned again in Esther, and that is in the 6th chapter, when King Ahasuerus can't sleep at night, and he asks for one of the courtesans to come in and share with him the deeds of the kingdom. The name of the book, that is the deeds of the kingdom, is called Sefer HaZichronot, the book of remembrances, the annals, this would say, Divrei HaYamim v'Hayu Nikrim Lifnei HaMelech, and then they read it to him. So there's a parallel again between the king who doesn't sleep, which is God, and the king Ahasuerus who couldn't sleep. The book Sefer HaZichronot, which God has opened for us, and the book Sefer HaZichronot, which Ahasuerus had open for himself, because he wanted to see, and in that, of course, in that Purim story, he learns about Mordecai, and it's in when God reviews the annals of the kingdom, God finds the good deeds that had happened when Mordecai saved. Mordecai saved Ahasuerus' life, and that again, it's like this crazy parallel between Yom Kippur and Purim, and it's not just because the names are similar, but you have similar themes happening at the same time. All right, back to the Unatan Tokef for a minute. So we set this up. We're in a courtroom. We're under God's judgment, and we're trying to experience that heaviness, that importance. And the prayer goes on, the poem goes on. It says, Ubashofar gadol yitaka, v'kol demamad daka yishama. Umalcharim yechafezun, v'chil v'rada yechazun, v'amriu Adonai hine yom hadin. So here, in this place, a great shofar is sounded, massive shofar. It's a quote from Isaiah, where in the day of judgment, the Yom Hadin, the large piercing noise crashing around us, getting right to our hearts, this huge voice of the kol shofar, the great kol shofar, the great voice of the shofar is blasted into us. It's like going to a football game or a baseball game when they blast an air horn, or you go to a party and someone's got a big horn. It just sort of cuts through everything. It's just very loud, riveting sound. Except then the author slides in this really interesting notion. He says, "B'shofar gadol yitaka," the great shofar is sounded, but kol demama taka, only the thin, small voice is heard, and that's a reference to, in the book of Kings, to Elijah, who was listening for God in the fire and in the typhoon and the earthquake, and didn't see God there, and God said, "I wasn't there," and then it's only the thin, small voice. So here, I think, is actually what one of my teachers, Bert Verzatsky, called the hermeneutic key to the entire prayer. You listen for the great shofar, but you only hear the still small voice. And I want to come back to that before the end of the night. So I want to just keep that in mind. You're listening for the great shofar, but you only hear the still small voice, the little whisper. You want to listen for the great shofar, and you only hear the small whisper. Because in the very next verse, the angels recoil in fear, and they're gripped by the shaking and trembling as they proclaim, "Here is the day of judgment, Hine Yom Hadin." So clearly, the angels maybe have missed that second part. All they hear is the shofar. They hear the noise. They hear the yell. They hear the trembling and the terror. And we go into the mindset of the angel, and they say, "Here is the day of judgment, Yom Hadin." And then the prayer goes on. It says, "Lifkod al tseva maron badin, ki lo yisku be'enecha badin, v'kol ba'alei olam ya'avir lefanecha kivnei maron kirat ro'eh avro, ma'avir tzono tachat shifto, ken ta'avir, v'tispor v'timneh v'tivkov, nefesh kol chai v'tachtoch chatzva kol bria, v'ktov gizar dinam." So here, if we're taking our senses of where the angels are, we go into that angelic place, and we say, "This is the day of judgment on which everyone shall be judged, even the hosts of heaven." Like the angels themselves are being judged. And that not just the angels, but everyone, right? And all the creatures will then parade before the master, like a sheep before the shepherd, or the troops before a general. And the shepherd will herds the flock, directing one sheep to pass over one over another. So you shall pass by, count by number, and record the nefesh, the soul of all life, and decree an allotment of each creature, and inscribe their final judgment. So at first pass, if you took the shofar gadol yiteka, the very loud noise, you can imagine yourself up in heaven with the hosts, all trembling in fear of this very important day. We've now ascended to heaven, and every single angel and every single creature being brought before God, and God passing judgment on everyone, like a shepherd counting the sheep. You go here, you go there. You go here, you go there. It's not the most comforting thing. In fact, it's meant to jar you. It's meant to jar you. And then we go on to the last part of this opening paragraph, which many of you, I think, know also. It says, "Barosh Hashanah yikatevun uvyom tzom kippur yichatemum, kama ye'avrum v'chama ye'berum, mi yechiyeh, mi yamut, mi bekitzor, mi lo bekitzor, mi b'mayim, o mi b'esh, o mi b'cherv, o mi b'chaya, o mi b'ra'av, mi b'tzama, mi b'rash, mi b'gefa, mi b'chanika, o mi b'skila, mi yanuach, o mi yanuah, mi yeshaket, o mi yetaref, mi yeshalev, o mi yetaser, mi ani, o mi yetasher, mi yeshapel, o mi yarum." And we'll get to the last line in a second. So here again, we return then to the image of the shepherd or the general opening the book, looking back over the deeds, and says, on Rosh Hashanah it is written, and on Yom Kippur it is sealed. And how many will pass this way, and how many will be born this year, and who shall live, and who shall die, who by fire, and who by water, who by warfare, and who by wild beasts, who by hunger, and who by thirst, who by earthquake, and who by plague, who by strangling, and who by stoning, who will rest, and who will wander, who will be tranquil, and who will be troubled, who will be calm, and who will be tormented, who will be exalted, and who will be humbled, who will become rich, and who will become poor. That line, which we sing in shul and we pray over, it's like almost like the most naked line in all of the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur High Holiday experience. because it asks the mortal questions, not the immortal questions, not about what it means to live, not the immortal questions of how to be good or just, or how to be a good man or woman, or how to be a good father or mother, brother, sister, how to be a good boss, or how to be a good employee, or how to be a good citizen. We're not asking those immortal questions. We're asking the mortal questions, the questions of life or death, the questions that take us down that hierarchy of needs all the way down to the very bottom where it's just about live or die, live or die, live or die. And the story of the Unatan Tokef, if we were to stop here, means that we end in this place where it's just a question of our own mortality. How many of you have ever felt that way? Like on a daily basis, where you feel your own mortality? I remember, as a kid, never feeling my mortality. Like I always felt like it was a chance for me to like be carefree and go do this thing or go to that place or jump off this cliff into the water or go on this adventure or eat that weird thing, right? So like those are all things that like, but once you begin to realize your own mortality, you begin to maybe slow down a little bit and begin to think about, okay, well, maybe I should do that. maybe I have other responsibilities in the world, and I just can't leave as carefree. And I think that this part of the Unatonic Hokif is trying to ask us to do that. Who will live and who will die? Who by fire, who by water? Gives us back to these most mortal of questions, right? And of course, the answer to those questions, right, is only one answer. The question of who will live or who will die, and how you is different than how you will live or how you will die. The questions of who will live and who will die, there's only one answer. The answer is that we'll all die at some point. It's the greatest thing that we have in common. We all live, we all strive, we all build, hopefully laugh a little bit, dance, hopefully loved and be loved. But the answer of who will live and who will die, the answer is we'll all live until we all die. And that's the logical conclusion of this part of the prayer. If you go back to the beginning, right? And you say, well, let's confirm the power and the holiness of this day, this tremendous awe, this majesty and kingship of being exalted in the throne of loving kindness. And then we get before the judge and we know that God is starting to take out that book, thump, thump, the book comes out, right? And all of a sudden we hear that loud shofar and we tremble and we recoil and we're afraid. If this is all that religion has for us, is this sense of awe and fear, and we end with who will live and who will die, I'm not sure that religion does much for us. The logical conclusion of being judged all the time, and then the last question is who will live and who will die, and you'll get your allotment, like it just doesn't feel right. Especially not in these times, not in the times of this pandemic. Someone dies of COVID, you realize that maybe they didn't do anything wrong. They're just born with the wrong DNA. They suffer. As a rabbi, unfortunately, I see people when they suffer, and I think about that, and I think, well, maybe there's something else this prayer has to teach us, because if this is all the question is, then who will live and who will die? It doesn't answer how I should live. It doesn't answer the question of why I should live. It doesn't answer the question of who lives with me and who I should live for. And that's when we get to the second key of this story. Because the first part of this, the first door we walk through is one of judgment. Of one we're feeling like every deed we've ever done, every secret thing, every public thing, everything we've ever said has been written down, and it comes down to this moment. And then the prayer turns. As it says, Uchuvat tfilat tzedakah, marivin et hara'ah hagazera. So let's pay pretty close attention here. It says the words of tshuva, of repentance, making up amends, of tefillah, of prayer, of reflection, and hopefully attaching ourselves to a greater story, right? And it's tzedakah, of doing justice, loving kindness. Pass over this terrible decree. So for this part, I just want to do this in reverse, just to put a stamp on it. What the author of Unatan Tokef is teaching here is that life is a roag zerah, that left to our own devices, in this very mortal sense, who will live, who will die, who will succeed, who becomes rich, who doesn't, who will suffer. Life just feels like a roag zerah. It feels like a severe, in the word roa comes from the ra'ah, which means evil. So it's like this evil decree that, like life itself, is an evil decree. And if you take the logic from the beginning of the prayer all the way to this moment, that's what life feels like. It's hard. It's sad. There's no room, really, for grace and for love. Life feels like a roag zerah. And then we get to the second key. Remember, that first key is the still small voice, and we'll get back to that in just a second. The second key is these three words, the ones that everyone kind of focuses on: tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah. So let's take them not in order, because I think in the modern sense, we actually have to take tefillah first. What is tefillah? Tefillah is not the same as avodah, of performing sacrifices and things. Tefillah is prayerful worship. And prayerful worship means that you attach yourself to a larger reality. So if you begin to go through this world and see that your sense of self begins to enlarge, and you attach yourself to a larger reality, a reality of a universe that is created way before you were born and will exist way after you die, a reality that can make you feel really small. Suddenly your mind begins to open, and you realize that we live in a backwater neighborhood in the corner of a Milky Way. One galaxy amongst galaxies of galaxies, billions of galaxies. So you can feel really small. But then you remember those moments of like your mom or your dad, or being a mom or being a dad, of getting ice cream in the summer, of laughing so hard that your stomach hurt and your eyes began to tear, or crying so hard because you love something so much. And in those moments, you feel really big. And you feel really big because your life is involved with someone else, and someone else's life is involved with yours. And that sense of feeling really big is also a version of expanse. So to me, tefillah is about that expanse, about acknowledging, telling that story, praising that, reflecting on that, wanting more from that. That's tefillah. So if you begin to look at how hard life can feel, and you begin to open yourself up, you can push off this evil decree that life feels like sometimes. The second one is tshuva, interpersonal relationships. So if your life begins to expand, you realize that you're going to bump into other people. That's like a fact of life, that you're going to bump into someone else, and that they're going to get along with your crew of friends. Hopefully you get along with your family, but there's going to be plenty of people that you disagree with. And having the strength, the sense of self, of going to someone respectfully and telling them that they've wronged you, and hopefully that they're hearing it, taking that risk. Or the other way, knowing that you've wronged someone else and taking the initiative to apologize. That's an expansive motion in both of them. And they make life feel better. Because if you go to someone and say, look, I care about you so much, I need to give you a little, what's in Hebrew, it's called tochacha, a little rebuke, so that we strengthen our relationship, and they take that on, you've now created something new. You've created almost like a holy moment there, and it sort of expands life a little bit. And if you, all the more so if you realize that you've done something wrong and apologize, you've done the right thing, so you feel good about that, but you've also repaired a breach. And repairing those breaches is part of growing bigger, and so that makes life feel a little better. And then lastly, the tzedakah, that's not just interpersonal relationships, that's whole systems. That's like taking the world and saying, okay, I feel connected to something greater than myself. I feel in love and I feel in awe of the world. I'm willing to try to work on my person-to-person relationships. Now my systems need to be fixed. The systems that create pain need to be taken down. The systems that create oppression need to be adjusted. The systems that make people poor, we need to fix that. And so tzedakah isn't charity in the Jewish sense. It's not. It's a Christian sense. Charity is something you do out of your own free will, and you're like, oh, I love you. Here's a couple dollars. Tzedakah is an obligation to make the world more just. It's not tikkun. That's a mystical understanding. Tzedakah isn't trying to put anything back together. It's actually just trying to build the world for the first time. But if you do that, then you've created 3 parts of your life. You got your very deep personal self, your interpersonal self, and your systemic self. And if you ask your questions, how can I make all of those better? Then maybe life will be better. And if you realize that, then you see that, well, maybe the author is kind of hinting at something here that plays off in a little different direction. That life can seem really hard and evil. Life can seem really harsh in this environment with COVID and with social unrest and this ridiculous political election that's just tearing out families apart, right? Life can just seem really difficult. But if you can fix those 3 things, maybe you realize that the answer to the question of who will live and who will die isn't really relevant. The question that really is relevant is how you live and how you die. And that's where we go back to that first key. That first key, the thing the angels couldn't hear, the thing we're supposed to hear, the thing that's kind of the sleight of hand of this story. Because it says, "B'shofar gadol yitaka," that very, really loud shofar is supposed to scare you and pierce you and tear you apart. But it's that still small voice, kol demada daka, that you were supposed to hear. Except the angels didn't hear it. That's why they all got scared. And that's why they looked at God as this general or this shepherd kind of kicking the sheep around. But if you look deeper and you listen for that still small voice, the one's calling you to be better, the one that's calling you to love more, calling you for art more, calling you to care more, calling you to more empathy for someone else's experience, you realize that the image of the shepherd is the right image. If you've ever, I don't know if you've ever gone shepherding, you don't even know that's the word, but if you've ever shept sheep, the shepherd is not like a master who just uses his staff to push things around. Shepherds know their flock. They know which one needs food. They know which one wanders off. They know which one needs a little help up the hill. Shepherds care for their flock. And if you understand that, then God isn't full of rage and judgment. God here is actually full of chesed, of loving kindness and grace. And God is trying to coax us along. It's not the great shofar that matters here. It's the still small voice. It's that little whisper that's trying to lure us into goodness. And the shepherd is the right tool for that, because a shepherd, if a shepherd was out front telling everyone where to go, no sheep go in that direction. That's not how shepherding works. Shepherds always stand behind their flocks, coaxing, helping, feeding. That's what shepherds do. But the angels couldn't see that. All they could hear was that really loud shofar. But what we're supposed to do with a wink and a nod is to go along with that, but really listen for the still small voice. So on Rosh Hashanah, when it's supposed to be written, and Yom Kippur, it's supposed to be sealed, you can look at who will live and who will die, but that's for the angels to worry about. Our question is how we will live and how we will live with other people and how they'll live with us. And the reason why I know that is because you get to the last paragraph, which almost no one ever does out loud. No one ever understands that the last paragraph is the most important paragraph of the Unatan Tokef, and that's what we're going to finish out on tonight. Here it says, this is the part where usually like you move on in the Machzor, you like flip the page because you think tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, marim, et roa, gezerah, that's the end of the story. All you can do is like have a few moments of grace to get away from this evil life. But you got to get to the end of the prayer and realize there's so much more here, still yet to be uncovered. Here it says, Ki kishimcha ken tehilatecha, kashe likos lenanoach lerksot, ki lo tachpots bamavet hamet, ki im bisharo medarko v'chaya, ba'ad yom moto techakelo, im yashuv miyad tikblo. Emet ki atahu yotzram v'yodea, yitzeram ki hem basar v'adam. Adam yisodo me'afar v'sofor la'afer. B'nafsho yavia lachmo. Meshu kecheres hanishbar. Kechatzir yavesh. Ketzion novel. Ketzel over. Ke'anan kaleh. U'karuach noshevet. U'ka'avach poreach. V'chalom ya'uf. For your glory, it says, but really your name, your glory, your majesty, your beauty. You don't want the dead to die, but for them to turn from their path and live. The whole notion that God was standing over you with a book, trying to trip you up, and trying to find out how you're going to live your life so that maybe you'll get the bad seal instead of the good seal is the wrong notion. That's for the angels. Because what God actually wants is not for you to suffer, but for you to live. You wait until the day of death, accepting them immediately if you return. God is waiting for you at every last possible moment, not on Yom Kippur, not on Rosh Hashanah, not even on Sukkot or even on Hanukkah. God will wait for the last moment for you to choose to live your life with excellence, to use your life with love, to live your life with righteousness, to live your life with wholeness and vitality, to live your life with wellness and peace. And if you do that, God will accept you right away, which means everything that came out before in the Unatan Tokef is kind of malarkey, because if that's the God we're looking at, everything that came before is just the loud shofar blaring. This here is the quiet, still small voice singing, the one that we should actually listen for. Truly, you, God, it says, you're our creator. And you know our nature. You know what it's like to be a human being. You know how fallible we are. You know how hard it is to get over your ego, especially in this world where selfies are the most important thing. You know how hard it is to get over your ego when someone wrongs you and you feel that maybe you shouldn't be wronged by them because you're really important. You know how hard it is to make sure that your family is taken care of, even if that means you have to screw over someone else's family. It's hard to fight against all of those things. But God knows those things about us. God isn't trying to trip us up because we're just flesh and blood, right? We're just animated life with a soul that matters. And our origin is dust and our end is dust. And at the peril of our own lives do we try to gather bread, make a living, work hard, commute long hours, not be home in time for dinner, get short with each other because money's running out, get short with each other because we're exhausted, get short with each other because we've been on Zoom all day long. We work really hard and it's really hard to make a living. And in the end, we're all broken shards. As the prayer says, we're like dry grass. We're like a withered flower, a passing shadow and a vanishing cloud. Like a breeze that passes or dust scattering in the wind, like a dream that's fleeting, or the translation could also say a dream that's half forgotten already. It's like you wake up and it's already gone. But God is forever. That endurance is there. It says, you king or God who lives and endures. So how do you think it is that we live, we work, we push, we fight, we push, we fight, and then we die? This last line opens up the rest of the prayer in reverse, right? Because what it says is, don't be worried so much about the judgment. The judgment is there to scare you, to snap you to attention. But in reality, God just really cares about you and knows that life is harsh and that sometimes our lives feel like broken shards, clay. Sometimes feels like a shadow just passing, or a dream that you've forgotten already, or a flower that feels like it's fading all the time. But if we understand that God is maybe luring us through this still small voice into a better world, a world full of positive relationships, a world where we feel connected to a larger story, a world where we actually build the future we want to see, then being judged on this day is only part of that process. It's not all on the line. It's just the starting place. It's where we begin our work for the next year. And so at the end of the day, the Unatana Tokef is a bait and switch. And the question is, are you going to be like the angels and recoil from life and just get wrapped up in this question, who will live and who will die, and life isn't great and life is really hard? Or are you going to hear that still small voice and ignore that bait and go for something more beautiful? And realize that in the passing moments, the few fleeting moments we have in life, the question is not about who, but the question is how. How we'll live. And who will live with us. Who will share that space with us, and who will we share our space with. So I just want to leave you with that thought and go back to the beginning one last time. Listen for the bait and the switch. Unatana tokef kedushat hayom, ki hu nora va'ayom, uvo tinaseh malchutecha, v'kevon bechesed kisecha, v'teshev alav be'emet. Let us acknowledge, confirm the power of this day, for it is tremendous awe and filled with God being ayom, powerful and exalted, except that God sits on a throne of loving kindness and then sits on that throne in truth. Already in the first verse, if you go back to the beginning, you see the bait and switch. Fear versus love, trembling versus embrace, judgment versus grace. And you can recoil like the angel and only hear the loud blaring shofar of the world and realize that today is a Norah v'ayom, scary, powerful, trembling day, makes the heavens tremble. Or you can realize that today is really the beginning of love, where you sit on a throne of loving kindness. And that, teshev alav be'emet. And that is the throne of truth. It's not about fear. It's not about being scared. It's not about feeling like life is really hard and difficult and that's all the truth that there is. It's about realizing that there's something enduring beyond us. And that's God's love. And so as we conclude this evening, and thank everyone, those who participated with us, as you go into the high holidays this year, which are only a few days away, and get yourself right for it. The God we need this year is not a God that holds us in judgment all the time. Not a God that makes us and waits for us, lies in wait for us to trip up, mess up, and then write it down. That's not the version of God of Unatana Tokef that we maybe grew up thinking about. God is the shepherd. God is the lover who stands on the throne, sits on the throne of truth and loving kindness. And God sees how hard life is and says, I'm here for you until the day you die. I'm here to share love and to wait for you, not to mess up, but to wait for you to return. Shana Tova Metuka to everyone. Have a sweet, healthy, happy new year. We'll see you on the holidays. Take care.